Well, thank you everybody for joining us here on a beautiful October day here in North Carolina. We're talking today about one of my favorite topics. It's something that I've been studying for decades, and that is this concept of data-driven innovation. The thing I love about it is it brings together both the art and science of what we do. So in today's session, we're going to be walking through a lot, but my key goal for you is that today at the end of the session, you walk away with some strategies, some ideas of how you can take innovation and creativity and add it back into your organization and really even your personal life as well. I can imagine, and I've talked with so many people over the years, there's a strong chance that throughout the course of your career, you've had what you thought was a fantastic idea. You're excited about it. You put yourself out there, you're vulnerable, and what do you get back? You get, that won't work. We tried that. That'll never work. Or, it's a great idea, but that's just not how we do things here. It's not, we've always done them this certain way. And we're going to talk through those types of barricades, and we're going to talk about strategies to actually, get around those barricades, if you will. So just a little bit about me before we get started. I've been in the technology consulting game for many years, and I actually having fairly for a data team, a typical background in that I'm not IT educated, if you will. I got my MBA in strategy and team dynamics, and then I got into technology consulting around dynamics, and then CRMs and dealing with sales and marketing teams, and then eventually found my home in data. You can see some of the technologies that I've touched in the last 6 months. I tend to only think about the last 6 months because things change so rapidly. And the things that I thought I knew 7 months ago, in the days of today, in terms of our technology landscapes, it's probably out of date. So you can see that I'm a big SQL fan. That's the thing that, if you blindfold me, I could probably type out a SQL statement, and definitely the full Azure stack in terms of data. I'm a big fan of Databricks, which we'll look at today, and obviously Power BI and obviously Python. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to take this in a series of steps, and I'm going to be telling you some stories. I'm going to be talking through a process that I have seen work, and talking about in those processes how you personally can take data and apply it to the different phases to move towards that holy grail, which is to be a data-driven organization. So we're going to define what the challenge is, like around innovation, specifically around becoming a data-driven community and data-driven culture. What are those challenges and the barricades? And then we're going to explore the process, and we're going to go step by step. There's 4 steps, and we're going to walk through each step and walk through the basics, and then walk through how data plays a role in each of those. And then we're going to talk about a very controversial topic, which is how can I tell if all this is worth it? Is innovation worth it? And we're going to wrap up today with a case study. It's a very powerful story from our team. It's a huge success, something we're super proud of, that I think encapsulates a lot of what this whole talk is going to be about. So I want to start you off with a story that I find heartwarming and funny even to this day. So about 12 years ago, I'm sitting with my daughter, who was a couple years old at the time, watching her favorite cartoon, Curious George. And we're nestled on the couch, and I'm watching this episode, and I think it was Curious George and the Perfect Carrot. And we're watching it, and I said out loud, "Wow, that is a perfect metaphor for creativity." And this little 2-year-old looks up at me with this blank expression. And I said, don't worry about it. I'll explain it to you when you're older. In this episode, Curious George plants these carrot seeds, waters them, and then comes back the next day and is confused as to why there are no carrots. So he's explained why there are no carrots, that it takes time and care and feeding. And eventually he gets some carrots. Some of them are fairly jacked up, and then he has one perfect carrot. This is so perfect when it comes to thinking about creativity and innovation. First of all, you have to plant a lot of seeds. You have to give it time, patience, care, and feeding. And you know what? Some of those ideas are not going to be perfect when they come out. Some of them are, and some of them will be if you follow the process. So just a simple story. I love this. Every time I think about Curious George in this story, it makes me think about creativity and how perfect this one is. All right, so let's talk about the challenge here. As humans, our brains are wired with a very key paradox, and that is that we want novelty. We want things that are new. It's why people freak out every time there's a new feature on a phone or something that's going to impact your life that is new. We love it. But the same side of the coin, we really desire things that are predictable. In fact, one of the key things that makes our brains really prone to mistakes is we search for patterns where they or may not be patterns. And it's just a shortcut that the brain has evolved to do to make its processing a little bit simpler. So if you take this key challenge of we want new, but we crave stasis, then what are we to do? And how does innovation get into those, get those two things to marry up? And what you often find is companies do a very, very poor job of innovating. Here are 5 examples that you all may know. We have many companies, as probably the people that are on this phone have experienced these brands in some way, shape, form, or fashion, whether we were young using Kodak film or taking our kids to Toys R Us to go shopping. The likes of Netflix, Amazon, Dell, and Canon and Nikon have really put these guys out of business. And I bet you, and I know this is true because in grad school we did several case studies about some of these companies. The innovation kicking in did not happen until the very end. So Blockbuster tried desperately to roll out a Netflix killing kiosk. Too late. My favorite one, I love photography and is something that I'm really passionate about. Kodak is a really interesting story. Did you know that the first digital camera was produced in Kodak's labs in 1975? You can see the camera here that is about the size, they said it's about the size of a bread box. And the system that it was hooked up to, the diskette was hooked up to in order to be able to show the digital picture. So when Steve Sasson in 1975, he was 24, 26 years old, early 20s. He rolled this in on a big cart into the boardroom at Eastman Kodak in Rochester, New York. And he took a picture, and then he took the cassette out, handed it to an assistant who hooked it up to this machine you see here. And 25 seconds later, a really horrible rendition, black and white, of that photo that he just took popped up on a little TV. The board room there was less than impressed, lukewarm reception. They did not want to pursue this at all. They dropped it. And they, as you can imagine, we had a lot of people in that boardroom who were incentivized on the film business. the interesting thing here is that today, this camera that you see here, this digital camera, is in the Smithsonian Institute, and this company filed for bankruptcy in 2011. And here's just a picture of the Kodak stock that you can imagine was extremely high back in the day, in the 70s, and has continued to drop to the point of almost being delisted several times in the past, 2 to 3 years. And really super interesting note here. Do you see the spike towards the end of the graph? That is July 29th, 2020, when an announcement was made that Kodak was going to receive close to $1 billion in potentially forgivable loans to shift their manufacturing to be more innovative around pharmaceutical production. You'll notice the spike, it capped, but notice how it drops precipitously after that. And the reason is because that loan was not real. It did not come to be. So you can see the impact of innovation on these antiquated companies. So there's no doubt that innovation is huge. So we know that. I think we all agree to that. So let's talk about those things that get in our way. So we all can agree that innovation is good. It keeps us moving forward. It keeps companies from dying. But why do we typically see these things fail? A really good friend of mine who is a big fan of physics, she put it as inertia. All beings have inertia. All companies have inertia, which is you're kind of doing that status quo. You're kind of moving along. Everything's fine. Why would you upset that? You have that inertia. However, and that inertia is actually created into what I call folklore, corporate folklore. Think about those things as you're sitting in conference rooms or as you're sitting in meetings, the things that happen over and over and over and over again, those stories that you tell, we tried this once and it didn't work. Or, we always do it this way. It's the way it's always been done. We're just going to continue to put things on paper. Some of the other things that I've found really critically get in the way of innovation is companies tend to look at innovation when they're in crisis. Take the Blockbuster example. They're in crisis. They're seeing sales decline rapidly as people are consuming their products in a very different way. Creativity actually generally declines in effectiveness when stress is high. That's for individuals and for companies. However, you probably have this in your own life, right? Think about it. When do people say, "Hey, we need some ideas. We're struggling here. We need some ideas"? Generally, it's going to be in times of crisis. The other thing, and I'm sure we've all experienced them, is leaders who don't like change. Sometimes it's because their personal feelings on change and technology and data, they just don't trust it. Or it could be that they are incentivized based on that inertia. Happens all the time. I just had a conversation with somebody this week where they had a good idea to use data to potentially explore a new market for their products, but it was quickly shut down because it would compete with a different silo. And another thing that I found from a hurdle perspective is in this day of we have to be able to measure everything. It's hard. This is hard to measure, and we're going to talk about that as we wrap up this session. Great quote to get into your head as we move forward here is this one he's a writer named Jonathan Kozol, and it's pick battles big enough to matter and small enough to win. So I want you to think about that, because one of the things I've found in creativity is people believe that creativity has to be big, earth moving. It's got to be gigantic. And generally what happens is you try to bite off too much, and we've all been there, right? Where we try to bite off too much, it gets really hard, really complicated. and it doesn't go anywhere. Whereas if we were to take a small win, that is going to move the ball incrementally forward. And to me, that is the big thing that people need to get, as a mind shift, to move away from it's got to be big and it's got to be perfect to, hey, let's make it a little bit better today than it was yesterday. All right, so let's talk about the process. We're going to dig into, a process that I have seen work, and we're going to use a real world example as we go through to talk about how this works in the real world. Obviously, I've obfuscated the story a little bit to protect the innocent, but it is a true story. All right, so you may have heard of lots of different systematic ways of innovation. There's design thinking, which is a systematic process of going from a empathetic state of the problem and the community and the personas that you're trying to help, and moving through a process where you're defining and ideating, and ultimately you're prototyping a solution that is going to fit these needs, and then you test, and then you circle back around. Or if you take yourself back to elementary school, you have the scientific method, which is where you're observing, you're hypothesizing, you're experimenting, you're analyzing, and you're coming up with a conclusion. So kind of a similar flow. And then you have, in our world, you have this method of attacking a problem through, this is called CRISTM, and it is a circular process of understanding the business and data around the problem, preparing it, modeling it, evaluating it, and working in an iterative fashion to come up with a solution or come up with a new idea. All of these, if you think about it, kind of go through this normal process. So I've broken it down like this. There's really 4 disparate phases that are interconnected. In our first phase, you're going to do observation, you're empathizing. I love that concept from design thinking of empathizing, which is put yourself in the shoes of fill in the blank. It's designed to be immersive, and the goal, the output of this is to have a non-judgmental view of what you're really trying to accomplish. Then you move into the second phase, which is to ideate. This one is the stage that I feel, from what I've seen, is where the process starts to get a little off the rails. We're going to dig into that as we dig into each of these individually. But this is where you're actually coming up with ideas, you're coming up with your hypothesis, and then you're taking those things and you're basically sketching them out to say, if success happens, what does success look like with this idea? And then the next stage is you're testing it iteratively. You're going through and saying, okay, we have this hypothesis that we think, if we do this, we're going to get this outcome. Well, let's test it out. And then finally, at the very, very end, this final stage is you're gathering all those learnings, you're evaluating how you did, and then you're moving forward. Now, this is a very simple, in theory, 4-step process. And this is the first lesson I want you to kind of think in your brain, is that if you think about creativity, and some of you may be saying, I'm not very creative. I'm gonna be honest with you. That's not my strength. I'm just not born creative. I am a firm believer, because I've seen it time and time again, that anyone can learn to be creative. For those who struggle with the concept of creativity, I've found that breaking them into these disparate processes, thinking about what happens in each, and then looking at the tools and techniques that can get you to a positive result is really the stepping off point to really adding creativity throughout your entire life. So this is a thought experiment that we're going to run through as we are going through this 4-step process. So this is taken from a real example where I helped a company to address a very, very core problem they had, which is they were suffering from employee turnover rates that were extremely high, especially in a few core segments of their business. And as we all know, as you know, as you're looking at companies and looking at what really makes them special and great, bottom line, whether you're a manufacturer or a professional services firm, it all gets down to people. So they had a problem and they needed to fix it. And this was a company that, much like the companies that we looked at the beginning of this, they had only engaged in innovative thinking when the times were tough. In this case, they had turnover rates that were almost division destroying, where you would take your key people out of a division because they left on their own free will, leaving you with really a shell, nothing really to work with there. So it was pretty intense. Like many companies, this company was data rich, but wisdom poor. They had all the data you could possibly want, but they really weren't using it. They had, a modern architecture. They had data lakes full of everything from point of sale data to employee record data, everything you can imagine in this data lake. They were touching maybe 10 to 20% of it, and they were using it for descriptive analysis on how are they doing from a sales perspective. So the first step is that seek to understand step. And this is where we are going to get into the hearts and minds of our problem. The thing that I usually coach people through as they're going through this is that you really have to do a little bit of mind shift away from your normal everyday to get into this seek to understand mode. So you see on the left-hand side, I have these 4 things that I typically go into any type of problem solving exercise with these things. I remain curious. I remain vulnerable that, hey, my ideas might not be the best ideas, or I may be missing something, but I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to put myself out there. A big key, huge, is not being judgmental about what you see. And we're going to talk about that here in a second, about some parts of our brain anatomy that helps to make that more difficult. And then further, I think this is one of these super skills. I think there's 2 super skills that if you wanted to advance, is learn to be more creative and learn to be more empathetic. Those 2 things are super skills. There's no amount of AI or ML that can take over those 2 things. If you look at the right, these are some questions that I tend to pose to people and to myself when I want to get in the frame of mind of this seek to understand. The first one is really for you. It seems to me we always or never do fill in the blank. Here's a great example. It seems that we always save for retirement through a 401k. Is that the best way? I don't know. Everybody always does that. Like, companies always do that. Is it the best way though? I don't know. There's that curiosity, right? The super powerful question that I love is, what could we be missing when it comes to fill in the blank? So for instance, you take your many manufacturers are very much on premise. They're using technology that was developed back in the 80s and 90s. They should be asking themselves, what are we missing by not modernizing our digital landscape? What are we missing? What could we be missing out on? And then another great question is to think about things going away. And this last question would be, What would happen if we couldn't save in a 401k? What would happen if we couldn't access our data on premise? What would happen if we couldn't sell to our existing customers? Really kind of getting you off base. And this is really what these questions are designed to. And you can make up your own questions, but ultimately what these questions are trying to do is to get you into that state of mind of, I need to look at this thing that I've seen time and time and time and time and time again and say, I need to look at it in a new light. And this is where data comes in. We have, if you look on, say, Wikipedia or in psychology textbooks, the amount of things that our brains do to undermine our success with good intentions is a humongous list. I've listed the most common ones I've seen on the right in blue. And the things in gray on the left are generally the manifestation of those things. So think about it like I've got a hunch or a gut or your assertions, your assumptions. Those are all things that could potentially hold biases. And I can tell you from experience that biases are most often not based in truth or not based in the whole truth. So this is a great opportunity to use data to challenge your assumptions. So for instance, we have in our brains the primacy or anchoring. Sometimes those go hand in hand, but those are fallacies where anchoring is you take one thing that maybe is something that you have experienced in your past or something that is pretty intense for you from a feelings perspective, and you anchor on that. And that is your anchor. You are not moving away from that position. 401ks are the only way. It's because, whatever it is. Primacy means like the first thing you come into. So imagine you are a plant manager who's been in a manufacturing plant for 35 years. You remember when you logged onto your computer and it was a black screen with green type, and you mastered that system. That primacy of that was my first system that I worked with. I knew that thing backwards and forwards. That thing is going to stick and is going to not only be an anchor, but it's also going to be something that's going to be very top of mind, so that when the company needs to innovate, you say, look, the system still works. So these are all these biases. Here's where data comes in. Data can challenge your biases. So for instance, another huge fallacy is the sunk cost fallacy, meaning that we're in this thing for X number of thousands of dollars. We might as well keep pushing, or let's just drop it. Do the data, do the analysis. Is it more cost effective to rent or buy? I don't know. Do the math. And this is really where this is trying to get to, is use data techniques to challenge your biases. And hopefully what you're taking out of this this section is this is taking time to step back, challenge what you know. So if we take our example here, in this case, we had a pretty top executive. And as we dug into the biases, there was a bias that came out that they believed that everyone was motivated equally, and they believed that everybody was financially motivated. That was a bias we called out. So then we worked together to understand ways to potentially challenge that bias. And this is where data comes in. So we did a value survey for the crew, and lo and behold, that bias was nullified because the teammates actually ranked financial motivation lower than the manager. So it showed an offset, and it allowed them to reframe their thinking. So it happens all the time. It may happen where you are, that your compensation plans are built based on executives' biases. You have no control over the numbers. They just happen, you know, happens all the time. So we're moving into the next phase, which in my experience, this is where things start to get off the rails. And we're going to talk about why here in a second. So this is the idea creation. So if you think about coming into this, we have a baseline of who we're trying to solve the problem for. What are we trying to solve? We're looking at the problem and the people clearly. That is so, so key moving into the ideation phase. Now, I said that this is where things get off track, and here's why. Especially when you're in that crisis mode, there is a tendency to go with the first idea. Let's take that first idea and let's run with it. To get the best outcome, you have to go through really what I've found to be a 3-stage process, which is collaboratively, individually, then collaboratively, you go through divergent thinking, which is you're trying to fill up the proverbial dump truck full of ideas. You want as many as humanly possible. Now, I can usually tell when we have a problem because I'm facilitating some type of brainstorming session, and I'm sure you've been in one too, where it's like, let's brainstorm, guys. And the first idea goes on the board, and then what does somebody do? Somebody from the back says, oh, that doesn't work. We tried that. Okay, really? let's put it on there anyway. Judgment down, no judgment zone, fill up the dump truck. For those people who feel like I'm not really creative, a great exercise for you is to take a product, an idea, and ask yourself the what else question 5 times. So a good common example that is often used is hand somebody a pen and say, what are the uses for this pen? And most people will say to write with, obviously. But then you say, what else? And then you say, well, maybe it's a paperweight. Okay, cool. What else? Maybe it's a dart. And you're just thinking about crazy things that could possibly be, this pen could be used for. Some of them are going to be outlandish. Some of them are going to be boring. Some of them are going to be right in the middle. The important thing here is that you are filling that dump truck full of ideas. Then after that, you have a good set of all these ideas. Then you converge on the ideas that you're actually going to try. So this is typically done in a separate session. And what happens is you take your whiteboard full of ideas and you start going through and starting to say, if we can only pick one, what do you pick? And then you start going through and talking about the merits of, okay, this is the only one we can do. How do we feel about this team? Until you get to a handful. And then for this handful, you go to the next step, which is you visualize success for that idea and kind of think it through from a prototypical perspective, meaning that maybe if it's a dashboard that is going to mean the difference between revenue and no revenue, then what's that dashboard look like? Just mock it up. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to work. You just have to visualize your success. Now, from a data perspective, this is where the data driven mindset kind of gets put on hold, because this is a lot more fluffy, less science, more art. However, I will say that there are some tools and some techniques that I love to use in this. One of them for idea capture is mind mapping. So there are tons of tools out there. MindMeister. I prefer XMind. It used to be an open source. There is a free version of that now, free, quote unquote, free. But what this allows you to do, mind maps actually were developed in psychology that helped you to bundle and to explore ideas. So if you can see on the screen, it may be a little bit small, but you can see like we have an option. So target incentives, and then we have kind of what that hypothesis looks like, and then what we would need to test that hypothesis. And we could go through and keep creating hundreds if we wanted to, where we're just thinking through ideas, hypotheses, and inputs. Great opportunity to keep your thoughts clean. On the other side, once you kind of start to get to that prototypical perspective, then the conceptual data mapping comes in, where you start to say, here are all the questions we need to ask. Here are all the conceptual data sources that we have or need. And then you start mapping, and what you'll find is that some sources are more important than others. Then obviously you can use something like a Power BI or a Databricks to do data profiling as you move into the next phase. So if we look at our use case here, they went through a lot of different things, and what they came upon was, what if we did targeted incentives? Meaning that, what if we match the incentives to the individual? That was their hypothesis, that if they started to get incentives to the point where people felt like they owned them, they would have a better response. All right. Now, this is where things get fun. So from an experimentation perspective, this is actually just taking your hypothesis and you're testing it. Some of the things that I've constantly dealt with is, some people try to set up environments that are too big, too sophisticated. They try to take all the data instead of just a segment of the data. And they don't really have fun with it, but really it should be an iteration, a play. And this whole concept of failing fast and failing well is a mantra that should stick with you as you experiment. And when I say fail well, it means that in each iteration, there should be a learning. If you're not learning in an iteration, stop, pause, reevaluate. And when it comes to setting up environments to experiment, it depends on lots of factors, but we have, from an Azure perspective, from a data analyst perspective, Power BI is free for Power BI Desktop. Super easy to do the entire prototypical and experimental aspect in Power BI. If you have some what we consider a citizen data scientist, there's Azure ML that allows people to do drag and drop machine learning. And then you have, for the larger use cases, you have an Azure stack. In this case, Databricks, Power BI. One interesting note, I did a kind of quick back of the napkin. If we had a normal amount of test data, we set up this environment, we run it for a month, your total bill is roughly about $230. So not a ton of, not a ton. And mind you, each of these are deployable within a day. You could be moving within a day of saying, hey, we've got everything ready, let's start experimenting. In this case, they found that the sales ops team was particularly hard hit, and they're particularly in the prototypical cycle were very incentive driven. So they said, hey, let's just focus on the sales op team. Let's see if we can figure out this process with this team, and then let's see how it turns out. And they did find more engagement for that crew, and they stemmed the bleeding. They found that the people were leaving in less numbers. So, and finally, we're talking about the analysis here. And this is when you've got your experiments or all the iterations. The key thing to here is going back to the original biases. You have to understand your results. This whole concept of correlation doesn't equal causation is huge, because you could make a decision that is based on faulty data. So it's really important that you understand the results and you put that to a human lens, meaning that you've got all these things that you got these numbers, we've got R squareds and mean squared errors and all kinds of like crazy statistical terms. What does that mean? Okay. And then challenge the results. You have to put that critical eye to the results. And ultimately, you're going to come up with a story of, here's what we did, here's what we learned, here's what we would do next time, or here's what the decision we should make to make an impact. In this case, the turnover, they decided that the new incentive options were key to retaining their talent, and they decided to roll this out to the entire organization, because of the results of the tests. So now we get down to the last key piece here, which is evaluating this whole process that we call innovation. This is the thing that people go from an accounting and from a very high level would say, well, is this paying off? I mean, why are we putting cycles into innovation? Does it pay off? And this is one of the most difficult things to deal with because it's very individual to the company. So here's how I think about it. I think about it on a matrix of impact and difficulty to measure. And so for you, this is just an example of some of the things that we typically look at when we think about, is innovation working? And this quote you see at the top is verbatim the things I've heard from a manufacturing CIO that was saying, hey, how do we know if we're doing good innovation? So the things like, revenue increases, how many ideas are we producing? Are our teammates happier? How many patents are we producing? Those kinds of things. What I will tell you is, as you are kind of placing these things out, think about those levels of impact where, for instance, if we went with this idea and we implemented this idea and it increased sizable revenue, more exponential that is, the higher to the top right it goes. Now, my experience is you take the things that are of higher impact, and those are the things you focus on. And then your whole goal is to look at those things that are difficult to measure and find ways to make them easier to measure. Move them up into that top right quadrant. That is going to be key. And when you get those things in there and it makes sense for you, this helps drive a lot of things in terms of data acquisition, maybe data that you don't have today. So for instance, from a culture shift, maybe you need to change the survey, the annual survey, to include things like, hey, how good are we at innovation? Number of ideas, how are we capturing those ideas that our team are doing from an innovation perspective? So when you brainstorm this out, focus to the right of the line, and it actually will help to tell the story of how well you're doing at innovation. So let's finish up here with a case study that I think is really fun to tell here. This is for Forsyth County Schools. There are a public school system north of Atlanta, Georgia. They came to us with a big issue for them. They had graduation rates, pretty high graduation rates, but they had very high standards for themselves. They wanted to achieve 100% graduation. And they had disparate data sources that were scattered throughout the school and the district, and they didn't have a way to easily help kids and look at who's falling behind and catch them early. So we helped them to build out a platform in Azure, and we iterated through these things, including things like machine learning, to help predict the students' graduation. We used Power BI and AutoML to do that. And one of the interesting outputs of that was and as we went through this process, you can see that this process fits, where we have 6% of kids that aren't graduating. We can do better. And then they're empathizing with those teachers and counselors. They ideated on, what do we need to be successful, from metrics, from surveys, from information. We iterated on the actual experiment, if you will, of what visualizations helped the most, what models helped the most. And then we found a really interesting output of this, which is that students who attended more field trips were more likely to graduate than students who abstained from field trips. This is one of those things where you could start to talk about challenging the results. But as a consultant, one of the things that's really interesting to me is taking this learning and applying it elsewhere. In our business, we've seen that if somebody stops participating in things like educational opportunities, meetings, not mandatory meetings, it's a good indication that they're probably going to leave us. So it's a great example of where, from a consultant's point of view, we took this learning from this high school of what causes people to not graduate, and we can take the learning and pass it on to other companies. So I hope that's been helpful for you in terms of framing your mind a little bit differently, in terms of thinking about innovation. Why is it so critical? Thinking about those 4 steps. You're innovating by empathizing with the problem, challenging your folklore, then moving into kind of that ideation phase where you're getting yourself out of the one and done mentality. You're starting to think about, I need lots of different ideas and I need to funnel them down. Experimenting. Think about get going quickly and fail quickly and learn as you go. And finally, as you analyze those results, challenge your results and think about them from a human aspect, not necessarily trusting what the algorithms are coming out with. So thank you for sticking with us here. And Crystal, do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions as of yet, so I'm going to give like a minute or so for people to write any questions if they have any.
So if you are, as we're waiting for questions, if you are interested in talking more about this concept of data-driven innovation, you want to tell your story. We always love to hear stories about innovation, what's going well, what's not going well. My email address is down the bottom left here of the screen. Love to hear from you and to continue the conversation there if you're so inclined.
All right, looks like we don't have any questions. If you guys think of any questions from now until whenever, please feel free to reach out to Jeff. Like you said, his email's down there at the bottom of the screen. Or if you guys have any questions about the webinar, you can feel free to reach out to myself. I want to thank you guys for coming in and joining. Jeff, I want to thank you so much for hosting. As for the recording, I know so many people asked about the recording. The recording will be posted tomorrow on our YouTube channel around about noon Eastern Standard Time, and you guys will also receive an email link tomorrow with the recording in there as well. As I said, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Jeff or myself. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday. Jeff, again, thank you so much for hosting. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.